Hello, this is Can't Not Create, my newsletter with stories and strategies for artists figuring out how to start their creative careers. And today I have Claire Brown, advisor to businesses. I'll let you do a little bit more relevant intro because I did look at your profile online and I was like, there's a lot of things to say about you. It looks like you're an advisor to a bunch of things. Most importantly to me is that you're the mother of one of my daughter's best friends and have become a good friend. And send me some of, I'll say you're one of my favorite curators of Instagram reels that you share with me. And I'll leave it at that. But yes, what else should I say about you that I didn't get that would be relevant to your expertise in businesses and legal things?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit more about my firm. I don't expect that most people know much about Portland law firms, but we represent privately held Pacific Northwest businesses for the most part. We do anything a business might need. If there's a dispute, if there's an employment issue, if there's an immigration matter, we have people who can handle it. Mostly what I do, the more experience I get as a lawyer, the more I find I'm spending a lot of time in meetings and on the phone just thinking through an issue and providing advice. I do a lot less writing documents than I used to, but I still do a fair amount of that. So I am never in a courtroom. I'm talking to boards of directors or business owners about what they should do in a particular situation, how they should think about risk, how they should think about the effect the decision will have on their business going forward and what next steps might be. So I buy and sell companies a lot. I write contracts a lot, but I think the reason that you wanted to talk to me is that I help a lot of people start their businesses and decide what form their businesses should take and what documents or structures are really important to have in place from the very start.
Yes, yes, that is exactly right. Because I imagine that the level of things I would want to know are probably like just barely scratch the surface of your expertise and what you're regularly doing, but it still is a question. And I was like, what a good resource to have to go through the different scenarios and think through things. So why don't we take my scenario at the moment and give me advice on what to do, which I think
Yeah,
right now I've done nothing.
real-time example here. Let's
Yes. So my scenario is that I have decided I want to pursue art. I was like, I'll start with this newsletter thing. I set up like a subscription model where people can pay for the newsletter. All that to say, that is like the only source of income I have related to this. I did not expect to have any other income yet, but I would like to in the nearest future. I have paid for things like my website domain, the subscription fee for the newsletter. I bought a couple things. I don't know. I've incurred like $1,000 of expenses in the last 6 months. Not a lot. I have probably made maybe close to $100 now. I don't know. Not very much. Is starting a business like an LLC or something like that something that should even be on my radar at this point? Purpose to that, or is that something I can think about later? What do you advise people in that situation?
Yeah, in general, anytime your risk is changing type or magnitude, it's a good idea to think about a couple of things: insurance and entity protection. So, the really big advantage of having, for example, an LLC, which is a creator like you, that's the only thing that really makes sense. There's also, you might hear people talk about an S Corp. That is if you are getting enough money from your endeavor that you can pay yourself a salary that's market rate and also you're taking distributions of profit on top. That's when an S corp makes sense. But most people, most artists, most people who have LLCs are just that's not a concern.
Okay.
But an LLC does a few things for a business. First, the assets of the endeavor, your newsletter, your website subscription, your domain name, any agreement you might have with an independent contractor who provides some sort of services for you.
Like if I hired a video editor or something.
Exactly, or a web designer or something. All of that stuff would go into your LLC. The assets would belong to your LLC. The liabilities, if there's let's say you sign a lease. This is a bad example, but I will start with this one. Let's say you sign a lease for a studio space, right?
Mhm.
And then you just bail on the lease, you violate the terms, then they would go after the entity, not you personally. That's a bad example because landlords will make you sign a personal guarantee for the leased space if you're the only member of your business. But the concept is that that's your business. It's also, once you establish an entity, you can get it its own taxpayer ID number. You can open its own bank account. If you hire employees or whatever, the entity does. It is much easier to expand if you have that sort of scaffolding, just because you're not developing assets in your personal life that you're then trying to figure out how to put into an LLC or some other type.
Hmm.
For a single person, like one person doing something like you, oh, I should also say, and it's not expensive to set up an LLC. The state charges you $100 to do it. You don't need a lawyer calling you to form your own LLC by yourself. You
Okay.
do it. I would help you anyway, but I wouldn't charge you. If once you have more than one person involved, you really want to make sure that the agreement you have between the two of you makes sense and it reflects what you've actually
And when you
the
say involved, do you mean if I'm hiring someone or more like a contractor or people like purchasing things? What does that entail?
Yeah, so let's say Chris was going to help you with this project, right? So
Hmm.
Chris is going to be your videographer. So you're like, oh, maybe me and my husband will do this together and we'll own all this together or whatever. And now you have a partner, right? That's a time to really, you should have an entity around your partnership,
Okay.
an LLC. Or you're like, let's say you and I were going to do it together and I'll write all your contracts or whatever, we should absolutely have an entity, an LLC, and an agreement that says how we're going to do different things and divide responsibilities and any money that comes out the back end, how we're going to split it up between ourselves. And the reason for this is that so what I always tell people, sometimes people think that if you have an entity, it offers you protection and they don't really like, I'm protected because I have an LLC. And that
Hmm.
in some ways is really true, but in a lot of ways people mean it's not actually true. So an example I give to people a lot when I'm trying to talk to them about how they're setting up the company is, say you have an LLC and it's a delivery company, but you're the driver, it's just you. So you're picking up packages and delivering them and you get into a car accident. Like, you are not insulated from your bad driving by the fact that you were doing it through an LLC, or like your LLC will get sued, but like you will get sued too. And you might be, if
Okay.
scared or whatever, that doesn't protect you. Like, I have had people who like full on committed crimes be like, but I had an LLC, doesn't that protect me? And no, it does not protect
Like
you
you don't
from
stop being a person that can
don't
be
stop the person.
sued or
Exactly.
whatever, liable for things.
Exactly.
But it,
But
so what does it help you with then?
yeah. So as soon as you are
It doesn't help me with committing crimes. What is it good for, Claire?
shockingly, but say like you and I are in business together now and we're doing different things, you would not want to be liable for my bad behavior. You
Okay.
have control over what I'm doing. I might be like over here harassing someone or like embezzling or whatever, violating a contract. The advantage of an LLC at that point is that the only thing you're responsible for is your participation in the company. So if the company's got $1,000 worth of assets and I go over harass someone, so it's like something really bad. I'm harassing an employee of ours or whatever.
Yeah.
They sue me for my bad behavior. They sue the company. If you didn't do anything, you're protected. Your interest in the company and that $1,000 of assets, like that's the extent to which someone can go after you. Back to my
So what
violent
if, what if
example.
we don't have an LLC and you're off harassing people, but you and I are working together?
Yeah, so partners are jointly and severally liable for the other partner's bad behavior, essentially. If you don't have a registered entity that limits your liability, then it's unlimited. So you could, worst case scenario, like your house is on the line because of a bad business deal. So that's what we really want to avoid for people. Again, if you've got a low stakes business, like it is hard for me to imagine how you would cause harm to somebody through your artwork.
Challenge? That's
Real
maybe
life
a stretch.
advantages.
Like voodoo art.
Yeah. So the advantage to you of having an LLC, for example, is that it's professional, it's formal. You can do things like if you decide you need an insurance policy, you do it through your LLC.
Okay,
It's
because I used to, in my former life, I was a massage therapist, and I remember for whatever reason, right off the bat, they're like, get an LLC. But I think for there, you had to have insurance because you're like, just the nature of it, you want that. But I think that's where I was like, I knew before I had to get one immediately, but now it seems like I don't really know the point, but it also, to your point, doesn't seem like a big deal to just go get one. anyway.
It is not hard to just go get one, and then you have a clear delineation between what's you and what's your company. And again, if you behave poorly, it won't protect you from your own personal poor behavior, but if there's anything to do with your company, then it's good to have separation
Got
of
it.
what belongs to the company, what belongs to you. One thing to consider is that there's a point when something's just a hobby, you can't deduct your business expenses, and then it becomes, once, depending on the extent of your income and how much of your time it takes up and stuff, it could make sense to start. It is a real business and you pay taxes on your business activities, but you can deduct your expenses. So an important person to have in your arsenal is an accountant who is used to dealing with small businesses and specifically single member LLCs. I think most artists are, that's probably what you're going to put yourself in without charging you an arm and a leg. And there are good accountants in town who kind of help. They bridge the gap between bookkeeping and accounting and can advise on those sorts of things when you need a little more formality.
Gotcha. Yeah, luckily we have an accountant because Chris's, my husband's, taxes are much more complex because he is self-employed and has an LLC, and there's a lot of like complexities to it. I don't really know. Mine has always just been like a W-2 so far. But I did this year, because we just did this last week, I submit my taxes and I do all my spreadsheets of healthcare, childcare, whatever. I don't know if that helps me in any way, but I slipped in a little sheet that was like, here's my list of $1,000 that I've lost. Can you
Yeah.
deduct this? And I just wrote, if not applicable, never mind.
That's your accountant's problem.
Yeah. But so is that, and
Client.
maybe some of these verge on like accountant questions, but if I don't have an LLC, can I claim deductions for things like that?
So if you don't have an LLC, you have what's called a sole proprietorship. It's still a business. Like you can still have a business that's just you. It's just you don't have the protection of limited liability.
Okay, so
So
it's not really related to the finances or taxes in the same way.
yeah, until you're choosing a different way to be taxed. With an LLC, the LLC itself doesn't pay tax. Everything just passes through to the members, to you. Form one, it would just go on your personal tax return because it's really just you. Then once you get to the point where you're actually making money from a venture, then it's, do I want to be an S
Yeah.
corp to avoid some self-employment tax? And there are ways you can start to minimize. You ratchet up the complexity in order to minimize your taxes, and there's a gap where it's a wash because it costs you more money to add complexity with like legal and accounting fees, but then you save it
Hmm.
kind of the same amount. And so where would you rather spend the money? But then after that point, you can really get some meaningful tax savings.
Okay,
But
so if
not,
you're headed in that direction, it might be good to set up while you're in that gray area. But if that's where you might sit for a while, it might just make life complicated.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of setting things up, that's very generous of you to offer to help me. I might take you up on that. For other people, I won't assume this offer applies to everyone in the world, but if you type in set up LLC, you get all these ads for like LegalZoom and things like that. Is that something that people should do? Like it makes you feel like you can't just do it on your own. Is this something that like I by myself can go set up, or is it helpful to have some kind of assistance or software or something help you?
Yeah, you do not need to use LegalZoom. So if it's just one person,
Hmm.
the technical answer is I would love everyone to have just a perfect document. And so just hire a lawyer to give you a perfect document. I understand lawyers are expensive. The times that I've had to work with a lawyer, I've been like, oh my God, it's just stupid how expensive this is. So I understand.
Yeah.
The state of Oregon and most states will walk you through on their website forming an entity, and they've got like fields that you fill in with the name and stuff, which is why I say you can do it yourself. Like the state will help you. It ends up looking like a state form, but I wouldn't say you need to pay me hundreds of dollars to make it look better
Hmm.
than the state can provide. There are some things that, like I said, I would help what boxes to check and whatever, but you
Yeah.
don't pay LegalZoom or for a single member LLC. And then anything that's more complicated than that, like if you have a partner, then you should get an actual advisor who can help you with the terms that you're agreeing to, and you should not use LegalZoom or another
Okay.
fill in the blank entity for something like that because those decisions are meaningful. Like they have real dollars and cents effects on your business.
Okay. And when you say they have real dollars and cents effects, do you just mean like in terms of how the money is balanced between you and your partner, or like what happens if you change the structure later on, or is it like actually how you're earning your income like to start, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. The sticking points I come to are what do we have to do, right? Are we both full time? What does full time mean? Are we accountable to ourselves for how much we're putting in here in terms of effort, or do we want to be accountable to each other in some meaningful way? That
Hmm.
usually is a pretty robust conversation. What happens if we need more money? Can people be required to put money into this company, or are you just assuming that the company is going to generate its own money, which is a risk? What happens if we disagree? So if you, I don't know, say we're in a partnership together and I really want to hire somebody because I've been doing all the bookkeeping and I don't want to do it anymore. And you're like, that was the whole deal. You were going to do the bookkeeping. And so now you want to incur this big expense and I want you to just do it. How do we resolve a disagreement like that? Is there a formal set of steps we're supposed to follow? Or if we just decide we can't be in business with each other anymore, if we can't reach agreement on this key issue, is there a way for one of us to buy the other one out? And then how do you dissolve, how do you divide up the assets of the company in a way that feels fair? It will never feel fair to people from your, at least you acknowledge that there's a process that you set out in advance of it.
Yeah.
The advantage of working with a lawyer for those sorts of decisions is that people always think people come to my office being like, we already talked about this and we agreed, just write it up. But then as soon as I start asking, what about this? What about this? There's very rarely as much agreement as people think. It's just that the questions haven't uncovered where the areas of disagreement are. So that's something
Yeah.
that really help you with is like the conversation about if this happens, then what? Okay, you're both going to work full time for this. You're not going to have outside income. Full time means 40 hours a week. What happens if someone gets sick? Are they on a partnership? Do they stop getting their money? If you have to hire someone because someone gets sick to do those tasks, does it come out of their portion or is that just a company expense? There are things that will really affect someone's participation in the financial side of the company. And then also, what if someone decides they want to shift what they're doing? Like, we start this company to do visual arts, and I think we should start supporting performance arts instead. And you're like, that's not really what I signed up for. It's the company's half mine, Colleen. You don't get to decide. How do we resolve disputes like that or disagreements like that?
Got it. Okay. So definitely get a lawyer or an advisor if
Oh,
you're with someone else. Yeah. No, and I think this is like a stretch of a metaphor, but I always think about like how terrible I am at getting dressed for things because I always assume I'll just continue to be the temperature I currently am. So if it's like raining, but it's supposed to be hot, I'm like, I'm not gonna get hot today. And that sounds like partners going into business together. They're like, this will all be perfect. I don't need
100%.
sunglasses.
Yeah, it's like having a good partnership agreement. It's a little bit like a prenup, which is funny because I am married and I do not have a prenup, even though I'm a lawyer. It's a good idea to have one. We just didn't want to. So I'm like understanding that I'm having,
You just avoid all activities with lawyers now that you know what's involved.
yeah, they're expensive, man.
Can
Um,
you write your own prenup? Is that allowed? Or is that a conflict of interest?
I would not because I don't know that area of law at all, and it is very complicated. But yeah, I think that would be an ethical issue.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
But I don't actually know.
Look into that and let me know.
Yeah, but it's
So
like when you people go you go into business with another person because you're so excited about what you can accomplish together. You feel really positively about the other person, what they bring to the endeavor. That is the happiest you will ever be with your business relationship is
before you
setting.
start it.
And so that's the time to set the guardrails for how you're going to have constructive disagreements with each other, how you're going to work through a fundamental disagreement about a business issue, how you're going to decide when it's time to just call it, this isn't working, and what does
Hmm.
that mean? And you set out a process that, again, it won't feel fair, but at least it feels like we were reasonable people when we agreed to this, and now we've got a roadmap. Um, it will never be easier to set out those guardrails than at the very beginning of your business.
Yeah, that is wise advice. That does sound a lot like what I've heard about prenups. We didn't make one either, but oh, okay. So slightly different question. Is there any need to have an LLC or like business structure like that if you are applying for grants or things like that?
So trying to think if I know any grants that require you to be an entity. Once you are taking on outside money from another source, I think you probably want to be an entity for limited liability reasons. So let's say you get a $10,000 grant from the state to do an art installation,
Hmm.
and I don't know, there's a flood, so you don't do it, or you don't do it on time or something, and there's nothing clear in your contract that forgives your failure to perform due to weather because no one thought about it or whatever.
Hmm.
And so now you're on the hook for you didn't fulfill the terms of this contract, but you spent the money because you actually were ready to do it. So you wouldn't want the grantor to be able to go after you personally and say, "Give me my $10,000 back. You didn't do what you said you were going to do." You'd want them to go after your business and say, "Give me my $10,000 back." And you say, "I spent nine of it. Like, you can have the stuff in the company and the
Hmm.
$1,000, but like you can't go after me personally. I didn't do anything wrong." So I think at that point, I would say just spend the $100 and get an LLC, and then
Got
have,
it.
I mean, so you get an LLC, you get an EIN from the IRS, an employer identification number, and that lets you open a bank account. And now you've got a lot of formality around what are the company's assets and what are yours.
Hmm.
I don't know of any grants that would be available to a for-profit entity that wouldn't be available to an individual, unless there's some requirement to establish yourself as there might be preferred contractors, like for women-owned businesses or something, and you might have to be an entity to get one of those. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, and I remember the reason I was thinking about that. So I guess I don't know, setting up a nonprofit hasn't been on my mind, but what are the scenarios where that might make sense for someone?
Yeah, so a nonprofit, the funds that the nonprofit has, depending on the type of nonprofit, either the donations are tax deductible to the donors, or in some nonprofits, donations are not tax deductible, but the activities of the nonprofit aren't taxed. But either way, the dollars in the nonprofit are not taxed. As a result, those funds belong to the public. They are not like personal profit for anybody. They can't be. They are public funds that need to be stewarded in the best interest of the public. So the
Mm.
people who run a nonprofit are fiduciaries. They've got an obligation. They are obligated to the public for treatment of those funds, which is a pretty serious undertaking. Like, people should not take that lightly. So sometimes I have people they've got a for-profit business and they want another income stream, and they see this is available to nonprofits. So maybe I form a nonprofit and that's another income stream. So now this nonprofit can like do scholarships for this event I'm running, right? Or buy my book and distribute it for free to people who would benefit from it. But they're really thinking about the nonprofit as a way to get more money to the for-profit. And I really discourage people from doing that.
Distributing a book for free, but like ultimately for marketing purposes or like some other thing
Yeah,
that
so
would.
so so let's pretend that you're an author who also runs seminars on the subject of a book. Let's say it's a self-help book. You write a book
Hmm.
about how to get started in a creative career, right? And so you charge people to go to your seminars, you sell your book. That is your for-profit endeavor. So let's say you start a nonprofit and you give scholarships, you fundraise in the nonprofit to give scholarships so that people who couldn't afford the ticket to go to your seminar can now go for free.
Hmm.
But all you've done is raise money to pay yourself. Like, the nonprofit is just paying a market rate for these seminar events. The person who's enjoying the ticket or whatever didn't pay.
So it would perhaps qualify if you were raising, if there was some external expense involved in bringing them in, if it covered their flight and their hotel room to come or something, but didn't give
No,
you
so
extra money.
if the nonprofit was meant to help artists get access to education that would help them start their businesses, like, that would be a reasonable public benefit. But your seminar is not the only way to do that, right? The nonprofit could not say, we raise money for this seminar.
Got it. So regardless of whether you're getting cash or not from that individual showing up, it's not like related. Is that kind of why nonprofits have to be like mission based and
Yeah,
have some specific purpose that they're doing to benefit the community, and that purpose cannot be just like get more butts in seats at your
that's
conference. Okay.
right. Yeah, totally. So if you had a nonprofit, let's say there's a nonprofit that wants to give kids scholarships so they can do after school soccer. So there's this specific soccer program that's round up your registration fee so that we can give scholarships through our nonprofit to like other kids who want to do the soccer program. That's not allowed. I realize someone might call you and be like, "What's she talking about? That's what my kid's soccer program does."
Yeah.
But that is not allowed. Has to be is a nonprofit that makes after school activities available to children, but is not tied to a specific for-profit entity, and it's just funneling money to it.
I
So,
see.
so the idea is that it has to be for the benefit of the public, not a small group of people. I couldn't make a nonprofit for like my family or something. So this happens a lot with creators where they're like attracted by this other income stream and grants are available to nonprofits. So can't I just have a nonprofit? And there's nothing wrong with having a nonprofit that is in the same field that you are participating in, a visual arts nonprofit or a business development nonprofit. Those things are all fine. It's just that the mission of the nonprofit can't be to support your for-profit endeavor. It's got to be a public benefit, which means that it has to be flexible.
No, that makes sense. So far, nothing that I have been doing has ever felt like something that feels like a nonprofit. But I have been curious because as you think more about different options for entering into the art world, I think it's where you do start hearing about grants and different opportunities like that you start to hear about nonprofits or different business structures. And that's why that was on my mind. Okay. So let's see. Another thing is like looking at the contracts and things that happen between artists and galleries. Is that a world that you have ever been involved in or had come up with your work?
So I look at contracts all the time. I don't think I have done an artist and gallery contract, but I'm sure some of my partners have. And we work with a lot of arts organizations that have regular contracts with artists. I've done like performance contracts, but that's a little different than what you're describing.
Yeah, it
I
just
mean,
seemed like there was like a million different factors that could go into it. Sometimes people just say, oh, yeah, you'll get this cut, I'll get this cut. But then you have to put into the contract, like, what's the bottom price that you'll be willing to do if we negotiate? Who's going to cover shipping or handling? Who's going to, I don't know. There seemed to be like so many things. And I was like, wow, that seems like another place to maybe just have an advisor or someone take a look.
yeah, so if you're talking about you're going to sell through a gallery or show in a gallery and then split the proceeds of any later sale in some meaningful way, I would say have a lawyer look at it with your interest in mind. You want someone who's on your team saying, this is what it says, is that what you intend? So there's a lot of ways that you can shift risk around in a business relationship in a contract, and you just want to make sure that you're not signing up for something you didn't intend to sign up for.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm getting to the end of like the front of mind questions that I had. Is there anything that like you think people should be thinking about more, either in my situation or maybe further down the line if they're doing this type of thing, like in terms of legally or business structure wise?
Yeah, it's always a good idea, and people do not usually do this. So this is not, if you say, Clara, I have not done that, then it's not as though you're behind. But think about the life cycle of your business. So you're starting something, where do you hope it goes in a few years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And then eventually, what do you see yourself bringing on a partner or selling or just winding it down when you decide you want to do something else? And those sorts of decisions will trickle backwards into the decision you make today. So if you came to me and said, I want to grow this a lot and then sell it in 10 years or something, I would give you very different advice than if you said,
Mm,
this is like a hobby, but maybe it'll turn into something. And maybe eventually I can scale back at work and do this more seriously, but it'll always just be me. Then that's a very different situation. So think about what your hopes and dreams are, and it's easier to future proof at the front end if you want to make some big changes in the future.
That is perfect advice and something I haven't necessarily done yet. So I will think about that.
Mm.
Let's see. I guess anything else that I should be asking, or did we cover the foundations for the moment?
Yeah, no, I think give me a call if you want to talk through any of this stuff, but happy to help you think about shifting little units of risk around. for
Yeah.
your
Perfect. No, it's like as soon as you said the words out loud, like what it's like legal liability
Mhm.
corporation. Is that, am I getting those?
company. Yeah.
I was doing my taxes recently and I was like, can I deduct these? And that was the only thing on my mind. And now I'm like, that's literally does not seem to be the basis of the thought process for LLCs and all of that at all, although it could be impacted. So I'm glad we had this conversation. And I imagine this could be helpful for other people because I think this is just like such a, if you're in my situation, you probably haven't entered this world or know what to do. So it sounds like maybe I'll go start an LLC soon and nothing bad will happen if I do that.
They stayed $100.
Yeah. It will not apparently give me the license to go harass people unprotected, but I'll try to avoid that anyway. Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Claire. I really appreciate it.
You, Colleen.